The air in the mansion was thick with the cloying, nauseatingly sweet perfume that clung to Cassandra Reed. The Italian marble staircase was bone-chillingly cold. I had collapsed on the bottom step, my knees scraped raw, the seeping blood staining the silk of my loungewear. Just 10 seconds earlier, Cassandra had stood 3 steps above me, a deeply provocative smile on her face. Then, like a kite with its string cut, she had thrown herself backward, landing with a heavy thud at my feet. Almost simultaneously, the mansion's heavy oak doors were thrown open. Julian Croft stormed in, bringing a glacial fury with him. His bespoke Italian leather shoes made urgent, wrathful sounds on the polished floor. "Cassandra!" he cried, his eyes filled with rage. He shoved me aside as if I were a piece of trash blocking his path, not even sparing me a glance. He swept the woman who was clutching her ankle and crying hysterically into his arms. "Julian, darling, don't blame my sister-in-law. It was my own fault," Cassandra sobbed, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her slender fingers clutched the hem of Julian Croft's shirt, her body trembling uncontrollably. "She probably has a grudge because you took me to the gala last night instead of her. It doesn't hurt, really. Don't fight with her." It was such a clumsy lie, one that could be debunked simply by checking the living room's security footage. But I knew Julian wouldn't check. In this house, Cassandra's tears were the only ironclad proof. Sure enough, Julian Croft's head snapped up. Those eyes, which had once whispered countless sweet nothings to me, were now filled with nothing but undisguised disgust and a sharp, killing intent. He carefully handed Cassandra to the housekeeper behind him, then walked toward me, step by step. "Alara," he began, his voice as cold as shattered ice, "have I not warned you? Cassandra's health is fragile. You'd better lock away that filthy jealousy of yours." I pushed myself up from the cold floor, attempting a final defense. "I didn't push her. It was her." A vicious slap struck my face with incredible force. My ears rang violently, and the thick, metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. My head was knocked to the side, my vision turning black. "You dare to argue?" Julian Croft looked down at me, his gaze like one would cast upon a disgusting insect. "Cassandra wouldn't even hurt an ant. You think she would use her own body to frame you, you washed-up housewife? Alara, you think far too highly of yourself. If it weren't for the 3 years you spent dutifully taking care of my mother, do you think you would have ever qualified to be Mrs. Croft?" I slowly turned my head, looking at the man I had loved for 3 whole years, the man for whom I had willingly given up everything. In that moment, something inside me that had been holding on by a thread finally made a crisp, shattering sound. 3 years. I had given up my world to become a homemaker. For his career, I endured countless business dinners, drinking on his behalf until my stomach bled. To please his snobbish mother, I had suffered endless scorn. I thought if I was gentle enough, patient enough, I could eventually warm this stone-cold heart. How laughable. Utterly laughable. "Security!" Julian Croft called out coldly, not even looking at me again. 2 burly bodyguards in black suits immediately stepped forward. Cassandra fell from the 3rd step and hurt her ankle. "You know my rules." Julian Croft's voice was devoid of any warmth. "Alara, since you can't control your hands, I'll teach you what the Croft family rules are." Before I could react, one of the bodyguards had already kicked me viciously in the side. A muffled, sickening thud echoed through the hall. I didn't even feel pain, just a suffocating numbness that spread through my entire body. I was sent flying like a rag doll, crashing hard against the expensive rosewood coffee table. The vintage porcelain tea set on it shattered, the sharp fragments embedding themselves deep into my arm. Then came the 2nd kick, and the 3rd. Crack. I clearly heard the sound of my own bones breaking. Extreme, overwhelming pain finally washed over me like a tidal wave. My vision blurred, and cold sweat instantly drenched my clothes. I curled up on the floor like a dying shrimp, every breath accompanied by a tearing agony in my lungs. A metallic sweetness rose in my throat. I opened my mouth, and a spurt of blood, mixed with what felt like fragments of my insides, vomited out, splashing onto the pristine white shag carpet. It was a shocking sight. Julian Croft stood by, watching it all with a blank expression, his eyes holding a hint of satisfaction. Cassandra, hiding in the housekeeper's arms, wore a triumphant, cold smirk. I don't know how long it was before the bodyguards finally stopped. I lay in a pool of my own blood, without the strength to even lift a finger. Julian Croft walked over to me, pulled a checkbook from his jacket, and signed a string of numbers with a flourish. He then threw the check at my face as if tossing a coin to a beggar. The thin paper scraped against a cut on my cheek, bringing a fresh sting of pain. One broken bone, $5 million. Julian Croft's voice was like a death summons from hell. That was 8 kicks, so 8 broken ribs. This 40 million is to buy your silence. Take the money and swallow what happened today. If I hear so much as a whisper outside that's unfavorable to Cassandra, I'll take your life. The check slid from my face, stained with my blood, and fell to the floor. I stared at the string of zeros, my vision blurring. 40 million. My 3 years of dignity, youth, and devotion were now being trampled under his feet with a price tag of $40 million. I didn't cry. My eyes didn't even turn red. When pain reaches its zenith, when despair hits its peak, what follows is a cold, transcendent clarity. Julian Croft, I managed to squeeze out a raw, broken sound from my throat, using every last ounce of my strength. These past 3 years of devotion, I really did waste it all on a dog. Julian Croft's brow furrowed sharply, as if he hadn't expected me to dare talk back at a time like this. He snorted. Stubborn till the end. Get her out of here. Don't let her filth offend Cassandra's eyes. I was thrown out of the mansion's gate like a piece of garbage. A torrential rain was pouring outside. The cold rainwater hit my wounds, sending waves of searing pain through me. I lay in the mud, watching the warm lights of the mansion and the silhouette of Julian Croft walking away with Cassandra in his arms. A cold, bone-chilling smile slowly formed on my lips. Good, very good. Julian Croft, the rules you taught me, I've learned them well. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself up with my last breath and flagged down a kind stranger's car on the road, heading to the most remote private clinic in the city. The emergency room air was filled with the pungent smell of antiseptic. A young ER doctor looked at my x-rays, his hands trembling. 8 fractured ribs, 3 of which are severely displaced, less than a few millimeters from your lungs. There's even a risk of a ruptured spleen. My God, did you get hit by a truck? Where's your family? They need to sign for surgery immediately. I leaned against the cold medical equipment, letting the doctors and nurses frantically work on my wounds. The anesthetic hadn't kicked in yet, and every breath felt like a serrated blade was being dragged through my chest. But I didn't even flinch. No family. My voice was as calm as stagnant water. I'll sign myself. Just stabilize me and give me painkillers. I'm in a hurry. The doctor looked at me as if I were insane, but under my unwavering gaze, he relented. The moment the hard cast was tightly strapped to my chest, I closed my eyes. Fragments of memory flashed before my eyes like a film reel. 3 years ago, the Croft family was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a severe liquidity crisis. Julian Croft was so desperate, he looked like he had aged a decade overnight. That was the first and only time I ever defied my father. In front of the Sterling family's ancestral estate in New York, a symbol of absolute power, I knelt in a torrential downpour for a full day and night. Only when my forehead was bleeding and my knees had lost all feeling did I secure the startup capital that saved the Croft family from ruin. I had hidden my identity as the sole heiress of the Sterling dynasty, a clandestine power with roots stretching back to the robber barons, their influence woven into the very fabric of global finance and industry. I married him under the guise of an ordinary woman, Ilara Vance, bringing the funds with me. I thought that in this way, I could protect a man's ego and earn a pure love. It turned out I had protected a venomous snake that bit me back. After the procedure, I refused the recommendation for hospitalization. I sat on the hospital bed and, with the hand that wasn't attached to an IV drip, pulled out a black, unbranded, specially encrypted satellite phone from my pocket. I hadn't turned this phone on in 3 years. The moment I pressed the power button, the faint light from the screen illuminated my pale face. The sound of the signal connecting was jarring in the silent room. I dialed the only number in my contacts. The phone rang only once before it was answered. Young miss, a voice, aged but filled with immense authority, came from the other end, tinged with unconcealable trembling and ecstatic joy. In the background, I could even hear the sound of someone knocking over a glass in their excitement. Arthur, I said, looking out at the pitch-black night sky, my voice as light as a feather, yet carrying enough weight to bring the entire city of Denver to its knees. Come get me. I'm done playing. Yes, Miss Sterling. I will handle the arrangements personally. Within 30 minutes. No. Within 15 minutes. The Sterling family's private fleet of jets will have their flight paths cleared for you. Arthur's voice was already choked with tears. Hanging up, I tore the blood-stained $40 million check to shreds and tossed it into the nearby trash can. Julian Croft, you thought I was a vine clinging to the Croft family for survival. You thought you could buy me off for $40 million. The game is just beginning. From now on, I am no longer the long-suffering, do-nothing housewife, Alara Vance. I am Serafina Sterling, the sole heiress to the Sterling dynasty of New York, the living nightmare that even your most powerful backers would bow their heads to. The next morning, the sky over Denver cleared, the sunlight piercing. Inside the Croft mansion, Julian Croft was elegantly cutting a fried egg at the dining table. Cassandra Reed sat beside him, pouring milk into his glass with a cloying sweetness. "Did that crazy woman come back last night?" Julian asked without looking up. The old housekeeper stood nearby, his face ashen, his body trembling like a leaf. He could barely speak, his teeth chattering. "Mr. Croft, Mrs. Croft, Alara, what about her? Did she die outside?" Julian sneered dismissively. "If she died outside, all the better. Saves me the trouble of cleaning up. Pack up all her things and throw them out. Don't let Cassandra be bothered by the sight of them." But the housekeeper swallowed hard, cold sweat dripping onto the carpet. "All of Mrs. Croft's things have vanished. Not just her clothes and jewelry, but even her toothbrush, her towels, even all the security footage in the house where she appeared, has been completely erased. It's as if this person never existed in this house." Julian's hand, holding the fork, froze. His brow furrowed deeply. "What nonsense are you talking about? The security footage was erased? She's a housewife who can barely use a ride-sharing app. How could she have such skills?" "It's true, Mr. Croft." The housekeeper's voice trembled, and he had to lean against a chair to steady himself, his face ashen. And at 5 a.m. this morning, the security gate reported that 12 black, armored Rolls-Royce Phantoms with custom New York plates drove right past community security and stopped in front of our house. Dozens of men in black suits got out and cleared out all of Mrs. Croft's things in less than 3 minutes. The scene, it was so intimidating that the city police cars just observed from a distance. They didn't intervene. Julian's knife and fork clattered onto his plate. Consecutive New York plates. Armored Rolls-Royce Phantoms. This was not a level of influence that the elite of a mid-sized market like Denver could even touch. This was the kind of display reserved for the true titans at the apex of the pyramid, the kind who even dabbled in the world's gray areas. "Are you getting senile?" Julian shot up, his face grim, but a flicker of imperceptible panic crossed his eyes. "Alara, that poor woman from an orphanage. How could she possibly be connected to people from New York? I swear I saw it clearly. The man in the lead. I've only seen him once on a highly exclusive financial news program," the housekeeper said, his voice nearly breaking from fear. "They didn't break anything, sir. They just vanished, along with every trace of her." Julian stared blankly at the empty staircase. The sense of superiority he had always felt, of having her under his thumb, suddenly had an irreparable crack. A nameless dread began to spread in his heart. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in New York City, the air was tinged with the scent of old money and polished mahogany. I was lying in the Sterling family estate's massive, temperature-controlled bathtub, which took up an entire floor. The warm water, infused with top-grade calming essential oils, lapped at my chin, soothing every tense nerve. The humility and humiliation of Alara Vance slowly faded away with the ripples. The bathroom door opened softly. An old man, leaning on a rosewood cane, with white hair but an imposing aura, walked in. He was the patriarch of a global business empire, and also my father, Heiress Sterling. He stood by the tub, looking at the horrifying still purple bruises on my back and ribs, which even the top medical team couldn't completely erase. His eyes instantly turned red. The veins on the back of the hand holding the cane bulged. "My daughter, my precious girl, whom I've never so much as raised my voice to, treated like this for such a worthless piece of trash." Heiress Sterling slammed his cane on the ground. The marble floor emitted a heart-stopping crack. The entire underworld of the city would likely tremble at this sound. I rose slowly from the water, allowing the 2 maids beside me to gently drape a silk robe over my shoulders. I turned around, looking at my father's reddened eyes, and a faint, yet icily cold smile touched my lips. "Father, I've made a fool of myself. Just consider it a lesson I paid for over the last 3 years." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the sprawling, dreamlike steel jungle below. My voice was as calm as if I were discussing the weather. But since the lesson has been paid for, it's time to collect some interest. I turned to Arthur. My gaze was sharper than ever. "Arthur, Julian Croft's company in Denver. Where is its largest funding stream?" Arthur bowed respectfully. "Young miss, All of the Croft family's current core projects are backed by our Sterling Industries venture capital division. This was originally per your instructions to secretly support him. Very good. I cinched the belt of my silk robe, my voice ringing with authority. As of now, cut off all capital flow to the Croft family. I want Croft Industries to be a corpse within 7 days. I want Julian Croft to come begging me on his knees. The climate in Denver shifted with breathtaking speed within 48 hours. At first, Julian Croft didn't take the housekeeper's panic seriously. In his brain, stuffed with arrogance and new money pride, Alara Vance was just a washed-up housewife who couldn't even recognize high-fashion brands and only knew how to make soup in the kitchen. Consecutive New York plates? Armored Rolls-Royces? It was probably that stupid woman, using the $40 million check he gave her to hire some third-rate actors to put on a show, trying to make him feel guilty or scared. $40 million was enough for her to squander for a while. Julian sat in his executive office, which overlooked most of Denver's skyline, and sneered as he tossed a file onto his desk. Cassandra Reed was sitting on his expensive leather sofa, contentedly flipping through the latest luxury brand lookbooks, letting out delicate gasps of admiration from time to time. However, Julian's sneer didn't last long. At 10 a.m., the office intercom began to ring urgently. His executive assistant burst into the office without knocking, his usually impeccable hair a mess, his face pale. "Mr. Croft, we have a major problem." The assistant's voice cracked with panic. "I just got off the phone with legal. Sterling Industries has formally withdrawn their offer for the $3 billion bridge loan for the East Denver project. They're citing a violation of Section 11, subsection B of the preliminary agreement, some minor environmental due diligence report we filed a day late last month." Julian shot up, knocking over his coffee cup. "A one-day delay? That's a textbook excuse. The contracts were basically signed. Call their representative now." "I can't reach him," the assistant gulped, holding up his tablet. "And sir, it gets worse. The Wall Street Journal just published a lead story questioning our company's liquidity now that the Sterling deal has collapsed. At the same time, someone initiated a massive short-selling attack on our stock. It's already down 15% in the last hour. Every investor is panicking and selling. It's a coordinated assault. A multi-front war. It wasn't a magic red flag. It was a masterful, strategic takedown using the market's own tools, legal loopholes, media influence, and financial warfare. All banks and partners wouldn't just cut ties. They would call in their loans to save themselves from the impending bankruptcy. "This is impossible!" Julian frantically grabbed the desk phone and dialed the direct line of Sterling's Denver representative, a number he had prided himself on having. A calm, unfamiliar female voice answered. "Sterling Industries, Denver office. How may I help you?" The representative he knew was already gone. He tried again. Still unavailable. Cold sweat instantly soaked Julian's six-figure, custom-tailored Italian suit. His vaunted business empire, the billion-dollar group he believed he had built with his own brilliant mind, was now, without the invisible support of Sterling Industries, revealing its crumbling, fragile structure within just 10 minutes. "Julian, darling, what's wrong?" Cassandra put down her lookbook and walked over in her high heels, trying to link her arm with his. "It's just one investor. We can find another. Didn't you promise to take me to New York to buy that limited edition pink diamond necklace? My ankle still hurts. I need to relax." "Get away from me!" Julian violently shoved Cassandra away, his eyes bloodshot like a cornered beast. He had no time for pink diamond necklaces now. Without Sterling's life-saving funds, Croft Industries stock would plummet by morning. The next day, creditors would be storming his office. "Get the jet. Contact the airport immediately. I'm going to New York. I need to see Sterling's top decision-maker in person," Julian roared, clinging to his last straw. Cassandra, pushed aside, had a flash of venom in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a pitiable expression. "Julian, darling, I'll go with you. I know some socialites there, maybe I can help." Julian was in no state to refuse. He dragged Cassandra along and boarded the first-class flight to New York that night. New York City, the metropolis that never sleeps, its air forever thick with the lavish scent of money, power, and desire. Atop a landmark hotel on Central Park South, inside a Michelin 3-star restaurant with a strict members-only invitation policy, crystal chandeliers refracted a dazzling light. A single meal here cost more than an average person's salary for 10 years. I was wearing a simple yet exquisitely tailored black velvet gown, custom-made by a legendary French designer, and sat quietly on a sofa in the restaurant's best private room. The injuries to my ribs hadn't fully healed. A slightly deeper breath would bring a dull, pulling pain. a reminder of that rainy night just days ago. But my expression was as serene as a jade carving. Arthur stood respectfully half a step behind me. Further out, 4 bodyguards stood like statues in black suits. Though their suits were unbranded, their every subtle movement exuded a chilling professionalism. This was the aura of men who had seen real combat, who had crawled out from piles of the dead. Young miss, as per your instructions, the Croft family's financial lifelines have all been severed. 7 banks in Denver initiated collection procedures half an hour ago, Arthur reported in a low voice, bowing slightly. I lifted the cup of exquisite tea before me, gently skimming the surface, without even looking up, too slow. Tell them that if there is a single cent of liquid cash left in the Croft family's accounts by midnight tonight, their bank presidents need not show up for work tomorrow. Yes, young miss. Just then, a commotion arose at the restaurant's entrance. Sir, ma'am, I am terribly sorry, but this is a private, invitation-only establishment. You cannot enter without a reservation and a membership card, the maitre d's polite but firm voice said. Open your damn eyes and see who I am. I'm the CEO of Croft Industries from Denver. I have more than enough money in my accounts. Get me the best table immediately. Julian Croft's boorish, new money roar was jarring in the quiet, elegant restaurant. To even have a chance of running into a sterling executive here, Julian had paid a hefty bribe to a junior manager just to get to the entrance, but he was still being blocked from the main dining area. Cassandra clung to Julian's arm, her eyes scanning the servers with disdain as she looked around. Suddenly, her gaze passed through a screen and locked onto me. She froze for a moment, as if she couldn't believe that the washed-up housewife she had trampled underfoot, whose 8 ribs had been broken, would appear in a top-tier establishment she could only dream of entering. But then, when she saw the unbranded but incredibly luxurious velvet gown I was wearing, and the solid gold tableware on the table before me, a wave of intense jealousy and venom twisted her face. "Julian, honey, look who it is!" Cassandra shrieked, yanking Julian's arm and pointing in my direction. "It's Alara, that bitch! I knew what she did with your 40 million. She ran off to New York to hire a boy toy and pretend to be some socialite." Julian followed her finger. When he saw my face, he was first shocked, then consumed by a towering rage. In his mind, he was agonizing over his company's impending bankruptcy, while the woman he had thrown out was living it up, spending his money in a place he couldn't even get into. It was the ultimate insult to him as a man, as a superior. Julian shoved the maitre d' aside and strode toward me, his face a mask of fury. Cassandra followed closely, her high heels clicking, her face alight with the excitement of tearing down someone's facade. "Alara, you shameless whore!" Cassandra screamed, her shrill voice echoing through the restaurant as she rushed forward. "You're using Julian's money to play the part of a wealthy madam? Why don't you take a good look at yourself in a puddle? Do you deserve to be here? Get out, right now." As she spoke, accustomed to her unchecked arrogance in Denver, Cassandra raised her hand to slap me across the face. In that instant, I didn't even lift my eyelids. I simply held my cup of tea and gently blew on the hot steam. Thwack. Cassandra's hand was still half a meter from my face when a black shadow flashed by. It was one of the bodyguards standing to my left. With no wasted motion, he caught Cassandra's wrist in an iron grip and, with a sharp twist downwards, snapped it. Crack! The sickening sound of bone breaking was chillingly clear. Cassandra let out a blood-curdling scream, her face instantly contorting in agony. But it wasn't over. The bodyguard, his face expressionless, grabbed her hair and dragged her like a dead dog to a nearby table where a top-grade Wagyu and seafood hot pot was bubbling furiously. The boiling broth radiated intense heat. Without a shred of mercy, the bodyguard forced Cassandra's face down, stopping just an inch from the scalding soup. The steam instantly scalded her skin, turning it red. She was terrified, screaming and struggling wildly. "Help me! Julian, honey, save me! My face is going to be ruined!" "Stop! Do you lunatics know who I am?" Julian roared, charging forward to save her. But he had barely taken a step before another bodyguard kicked the back of his knee. Thud! Julian's knees slammed hard onto the marble floor, feeling as if his kneecaps had shattered. A large hand pressed down on the back of his neck, pinning him to the ground, unable to move. The entire sequence happened in less than 3 seconds. The two who had been so arrogant moments before were now pinned to the floor like stray dogs. The surrounding diners, far from being alarmed, merely cast a casual glance before continuing their elegant meals. In New York's uppermost circles, This was a common enough fate for those who failed to recognize and offended a true powerhouse. I finally set down my teacup. The sound of porcelain meeting the tabletop was crisp and clear. I stood up slowly, looking down at Julian, who was pinned to the floor. The face that I had poured 3 years of my life into was now flush with humiliation and rage, like a pathetic clown. "Julian Croft," I said, my voice quiet but carrying a cold that could freeze blood. "Did you forget? This isn't Denver, where you can throw a tantrum whenever you please. Here, you play by my rules." "Who the hell do you think you are?" Julian snarled, craning his neck. "Alara, do you think hiring a few thugs makes you invincible? You're spending my money. Do you believe I won't call the cops on you right now?" I couldn't help but laugh. It was a laugh filled with pity and derision. "Your money?" I walked over to him, the black velvet of my gown brushing against his sweat-drenched face. "Do you have any money left in your accounts? Did that $3 billion bridge loan of yours ever arrive?" Julian's pupils contracted violently. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. The last thread of sanity in his mind snapped. How do you know about the $3 billion? He stammered, his voice hoarse with terror. "It was you. You did this. Impossible. You're just an orphan. How could you possibly have influence over Sterling Industries?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, I leaned down slightly, looking at Cassandra, who was pinned by the hot pot, so terrified she had lost control of her bladder. "In Denver, you used your power to bully others. To please her, you had 8 of my ribs broken." I straightened up, my gaze like I was looking at 2 corpses. "In New York, I don't need to throw my weight around, because I am the weight." I waved my hand. The bodyguards tossed them out like garbage. "Arthur, have security disinfect this area. The stench is unbearable." I sat back down on the sofa, my tone as indifferent as if I had just swatted 2 flies. Julian Croft was dragged out of the landmark hotel by security like a dead dog. The rain outside was heavy, the cold water soaking his expensive suit. Beside him, Cassandra clutched her broken wrist, sobbing like a madwoman. On the way back to their hotel, Julian's phone never stopped ringing. With every call, his face grew paler. "Mr. Croft, the East Denver project has been halted. The construction workers are protesting, blocking the main gate. Mr. Croft, the IRS is auditing the company. They're going through the last 3 years of our books. Mr. Croft, the board of directors has jointly demanded your removal and is pursuing legal action against you." Every piece of information hammered home one fact. The Croft family was finished. The once mighty billion-dollar empire had been crushed into dust in just a few hours by a terrifying, overwhelming force that played by no rules. In his despair, Julian frantically clung to a last faint hope. He refused to believe Alara had done this. He preferred to believe she had been taken as a mistress by some high-level Sterling executive and had whispered poison in his ear. If he could just meet the real power behind Sterling, if he was willing to kneel, to kowtow, there had to be a way out. The next morning, the storm had not let up. In Midtown Manhattan, in front of the Sterling Industries headquarters, a pair of black twin towers that pierced the clouds, the area was swarming with armed security. A guard every 3 steps, a post every 5. It was so tight, not even a fly could get in. Julian stood in the rain for 3 solid hours. He tried to force his way in and was beaten back by security with electric batons, left to curl up on the sidewalk like a stray dog. He was covered in mud, his once perfectly coiffed hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes vacant. He looked nothing like the rising star of Denver's business world. Suddenly, a series of sharp commands echoed from the building. All security personnel in front of the main entrance instantly snapped to attention, forming 2 long, solemn lines. A fleet of more than a dozen black, armored Rolls-Royce Phantoms with consecutive plates tore through the rain, pulling up smoothly in front of the building. The doors opened. Dozens of Sterling executives, men Julian normally would have had to schedule an appointment with 6 months in advance to even see, now rushed into the rain like the humblest of servants, not even bothering with umbrellas. They lined up on either side of the cars and bowed deeply. "Welcome, Chairwoman!" The deafening cry cut through the downpour, shaking Julian from his stupor in the corner. He snapped his head up, his eyes fixed on the lead Rolls-Royce. A foot in a custom high-heeled shoe stepped out. Then, a face he knew all too well, now as cold as ice, appeared in everyone's sight. It was Alara. No, now she was Serafina Sterling. She wore a powerfully tailored black suit, draped in a pure black cashmere coat. Her gaze was imperious, her entire being radiating the aura of a ruler who held the power of life and death. The Sterling executives, titans of the business world, didn't even dare to breathe too loudly in her presence. Julian's brain completely short-circuited. An unprecedented sense of absurdity and terror coiled around his heart like a viper. Impossible. This is impossible, he muttered to himself. He stumbled up from the muddy water and, like a man who had lost his mind, broke through the security line, collapsing about 15 feet from Serafina. Alara, what tricks did you use? Did you sell your body to some old man at Sterling? To get back at me, you stooped so low as to become someone's mistress? Julian shrieked, trying to use the most venomous accusations to mask his own crumbling reality. The surrounding Sterling executives' faces turned pale. They looked at Julian as if he were already a dead man. Bodyguards immediately moved in, pinning him to the ground. A knee pressed hard into his spine, leaving him no room to struggle. Serafina paused. A black umbrella was instantly opened above her head, shielding her from the wind and rain. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes cast down, looking coldly at the worm-like Julian Croft groveling at her feet. Her gaze held no anger, no resentment, only a pure, soul-crushing indifference, as if looking at an insignificant speck of dust. Julian Croft, you truly are pathetically stupid, Serafina said slowly, her voice quiet but each word a dagger to the heart. Do you really think everyone in this world is like you, needing to wag their tail and sell their conscience to acquire resources? She raised her hand. Arthur immediately presented a thick file. Open your damn eyes and see for yourself. Serafina threw the file at Julian's muddy face like trash. The Sterling Industries you've been so desperately trying to curry favor with. The celestial power you imagined. I'm sorry to disappoint you. This company, it bears my name. 100% of it is owned by the Sterlings. The file scattered. Through the rainwater, Julian saw the bright red corporate seal and, in the final beneficiary column, the 3 words written with absolute clarity, Serafina Sterling. Boom. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck him directly. The blood in his body rushed in reverse. His ears rang. The wife he had berated and abused for 3 years, the woman he had let his bodyguards break for a mistress, was the secret benefactor behind his entire empire. She was the very god he had spent his life trying to reach but could never touch. Who? Who are you? Julian's teeth chattered uncontrollably. Extreme terror made it impossible for him to form a complete sentence. My name is Serafina Sterling. I looked down at him, my eyes filled with absolute cruelty. I was once the blind fool who thought that trash like you was worthy of true love, but now, I'm awake. You like to talk about rules, don't you? In the world of capital, I am the rules. I didn't look at him again. I turned and walked up the steps. Buy out all his debts, my voice echoed in the cavernous lobby, carrying the weight of an irrefutable death sentence. I want him alive. I want him to wake up every morning in the terror I've created for him. Play with him slowly. Don't let him die too quickly. Julian Croft was thrown by the guards like a pile of sludge next to a storm drain. He lay limp on the ground, staring at the black tower that symbolized absolute power, and let out a desperate, bestial howl. The days that followed were the true beginning of hell for Julian Croft. He was trapped in New York. The Sterling family didn't restrict his freedom or confiscate his passport, but no airline would sell him a ticket. No hotel would give him a room. He and Cassandra, who also had a broken arm, could only huddle in the most dilapidated, foul-smelling rental in a decaying part of Queens. Worse than the environment was the mental torture that arrived punctually every morning. At 6 a.m., the dilapidated wooden door of the rental would be knocked on. An expressionless courier would, without fail, deliver a high-end, pure black envelope. Inside was nothing but a single X-ray film. It was the X-ray of Alara's 8 broken ribs. In the black and white image, the fractured, displaced bones were like sharp thorns, stabbing brutally into Julian's already fragile nerves. The first day he received it, Julian tore the film to shreds, cursing madly. The 3rd day, he looked at the shocking fractures on the film and began to tremble neurotically. By the 5th day, when the courier knocked on the door, he scurried into a corner like a frightened rat, clamping his hands over his ears and letting out a piercing scream, not even having the courage to open the door. The crushing blow from the massive information gap, the terror of being toyed with like a mouse by a cat that could kill him at any moment, completely destroyed the last of Julian Croft's psychological defenses. And Cassandra, who had been suffering with him, finally tore off her mask of hypocrisy upon realizing that Julian was now a penniless wreck. Julian Croft, you useless piece of trash! You said you could make a comeback. I'm starving with you. Give me back my youth. In the cramped, damp room, Cassandra used her good hand to furiously scratch at Julian's face. Julian's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed Cassandra by the neck, pinning her against the moldy wall, and roared through gritted teeth. If it weren't for you, you bitch, constantly stirring up trouble, if you hadn't insisted on framing her, would I have ended up like this? You ruined me. You ruined the entire Croft family. The two of them, like rabid dogs, wrestled on the garbage-strewn floor, tearing at each other's most painful wounds, showcasing the ugliest aspects of human nature. This was what I wanted, to strip them of all their external trappings and let them turn on each other in the most wretched squalor, fighting for survival. In the presidential suite of the hotel, I watched the surveillance footage Arthur had provided. On the screen, the two who were once so mighty in Denver were now biting at each other like rats in a sewer. There was not a ripple of emotion in my eyes. "Young miss, this is only the second stage," Arthur said respectfully. "I know." I raised a glass of ruby-red Romani Conti, swirling it gently. "To kill a person, you must first crush their spirit, release the recording. Let him see what kind of person his beloved, for whom he lost everything, truly is." I took a sip of the red wine. The liquid, like fresh blood, melted in my mouth, leaving a bittersweet taste. "Julian Croft, you think this is despair? No, the show has only just begun." The rental on the edge of Queens rarely saw the light of day. The air was thick with the foul stench of backed-up sewers and damp mold. Julian Croft was sprawled like a pile of sludge on a mattress stained with grease and questionable spots, his face covered in bloody scratches from Cassandra. Cassandra was gone. The afternoon she confirmed he couldn't even afford a bowl of wonton soup, she had unhesitatingly snatched the last valuable item he owned, a mechanical watch, and fled the desperate-smelling room like she was escaping a plague. Hunger and the dull ache in his ribs made Julian's consciousness drift. Just then, a sharp ding broke the silence. It was a black smartphone that had been wedged under the door at some point. The screen suddenly lit up, its faint blue light eerily bright in the dim room. Julian crawled over like a zombie and picked up the phone. There was no lock screen, only a blinking audio file. With a trembling finger, he pressed play. "Oh, Mr. Davison, don't even mention that Julian Croft. He's nothing but a penniless loser now, not even as good as a dog. He can't compare to you, darling. Even a single hair on your arm is thicker than his waist." Cassandra's flirtatious, syrupy voice came through the speaker, layered with the sound of loud music and a man's coarse laughter. Julian's pupils dilated instantly, his breath catching in his throat. "Didn't you throw yourself down the stairs to frame his wife for him? That was pretty ruthless of you, you little vixen," a greasy male voice chuckled. "Oh, Mr. Davison, you're terrible!" It was all because that washed-up housewife Alara wouldn't give up her position as Mrs. Croft. I just pinched myself a few times, took a little tumble, and that idiot Julian was so heartbroken he had her ribs broken on the spot. "Honey, you have no idea." The sound of her bones breaking gave me goosebumps. "But that moron Julian is so easy to fool." I shed a few tears, and he'd throw all his money at me. It's a shame he's bankrupt now. I can't be expected to go begging with him, can I? From now on, I'm all yours, Mr. Davison. That Julian Croft kid always acted so high and mighty in Denver. I never thought he was just a world-class idiot being played by a woman. The recording ended abruptly, leaving an endless echo of mockery in the small room. "Wretch." Julian clutched his throat, leaning over the bed and dry-heaving violently. There was nothing in his stomach but sour, yellow bile. Extreme nausea, fury, and humiliation churned in his gut like a rusty, dull knife. It was all fake. All of it. The pure, innocent little sister he had cherished, whom he was afraid to even speak loudly to. The fragile, idealized love for whom he had cast his own wife into hell. She was just a piece of trash who would play him like a fool for money. And for a whore worse than a sewer rat, he had personally driven away the woman who had knelt in the rain to save his company from bankruptcy, who had silently endured 3 years of his cold violence and abuse, and who held the reins of the entire global economy. Arg! Julian knelt on the garbage-strewn floor, his hands clawing at his hair, letting out a scream so piercing it sounded like a dying beast. He slammed his head against the hard wall. His forehead split open, and blood trickled down his nose and into his mouth, acrid and bitter. His worldview, the last shred of dignity he clung to, "At least I had true love. At least I was protecting someone weak," was mercilessly torn to shreds and ground into pulp. He had lost. He had lost everything, down to his last shred of dignity. He was not only a beggar in terms of wealth, but a complete and utter clown in character and in love, a laughingstock for all to see. After absolute despair came a twisted, extreme madness. Julian stumbled up from the floor, wiping his face with a blood-smeared hand. His once arrogant eyes were now filled with a crimson desire for mutual destruction. "Seraphina Sterling, you think you've won? You think your money makes you untouchable?" He roared at the empty air, spittle flying. "This is New York. Besides capital, there are rules here for buying a life with money." He scrambled on the floor and, from the deepest seam of the mattress, his trembling fingers fished out a folded, wrinkled bearer bond from a Swiss bank. It was the last of his private funds, secretly transferred to evade taxes. A full 10 million US dollars. This was his only hope of a comeback, his last resort for escape. But in this moment, reason had been burned to ash by the flames of vengeance. He didn't want a comeback. He wanted Seraphina Sterling, that high and mighty woman, to taste what it was like to be dragged into the mud and trampled underfoot. 2 nights later, at a derelict shipyard in New Jersey, the abandoned warehouse Hassan 3 was filled with the pungent smell of engine oil, the foul stench of fermented seawater, and a chilling metallic odor. Waves crashed heavily against rusted shipping containers, creating a deafening roar. A fierce wind, carrying a deluge of rain, ravaged this steel graveyard. A black Mercedes van, surrounded by a dozen dilapidated motorcycles, drove like a phantom into the depths of the warehouse. The van door was yanked open by a gang of thugs, armed with machetes and steel pipes. 2 brutish men roughly dragged me out of the van. My hands were bound tightly behind my back with coarse rope, my expensive black trench coat stained with mud and water. My hair, soaked by the rain, was plastered to my pale face, making me look utterly wretched. But if anyone dared to look into my eyes, they would find that in those deep, bottomless black pupils, there was not a trace of fear, only a cold, detached amusement, as if I were watching a play. "Move it, bitch!" One of the thugs shoved me hard, trying to kick the back of my knees to force me to kneel. Just as his foot was about to touch me, I whipped my head around. My icy gaze, like 2 tangible blades of ice, pierced straight into his eyes. The thug, a man who had grown up in a world of violence, actually flinched at my glance. He instinctively pulled his raised foot back, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard, not daring to make another sound. I walked calmly through the muddy puddles to the center of the warehouse, an open space illuminated by a harsh, blinding spotlight. There, Julian Croft sat on a rusty oil drum, toying with a gleaming Browning pistol. He was gaunt, his eye sockets sunken, his chin covered in a messy stubble, his eyes bloodshot with madness. He looked like a demon crawled out of hell. Seeing me brought in, Julian shot to his feet, laughing neurotically, laughing so hard that tears streamed down his face. "Ha ha ha, Seraphina Sterling, the high and mighty chairwoman of Sterling Industries. You think you're untouchable, don't you? You think you can bankrupt my company with a single word?" Julian waved the gun, walking toward me step by step. He pressed the muzzle directly against my forehead. The cold metal was stark against my skin in the rainy night. "Look at you now. Don't you look just like a bitch on a leash?" I watched him silently, letting the rain drip from my eyelashes, a mocking curve on my lips. "Julian Croft, is this your last $10 million trump card? You spent it on such a shoddy kidnapping service? I'm truly disappointed." Julian's maniacal laughter froze on his face, quickly replaced by a furious shame at being seen through. He jabbed my forehead hard with the gun barrel, roaring through gritted teeth. "Still acting tough when you're about to die? You think your people can find you here? Let me tell you, you've crossed the wrong people. You think money lets you do whatever you want in New York? The rules of the underworld are something a pampered princess like you could never imagine." He grew more excited as he spoke, as if he could already see me kneeling and begging for mercy. "I spent $10 million to hire the true king of the New York underworld, Nico the Scar Moretti. He has 3,000 loyal soldiers under him. Even the NYPD commissioner detours when he sees him. Seraphina Sterling, your capital is worth less than a fart in front of Nico's gun. Is that so?" I tilted my head slightly, avoiding his foul spittle, my tone as calm as if I were discussing the dinner menu. "Then you'd better pray that this god you've summoned has a strong backbone." My attitude completely enraged Julian. He raised his hand, as if to slap me viciously like he used to in Denver. "Stop!" Just then, a sharp command came from outside the warehouse's large iron gate. It was followed by the heavy, synchronized sound of military boots on the ground, a sound that drowned out the roar of the waves. Hundreds of fierce-looking men, wearing black tank tops that revealed extensive tattoos, and carrying American-made submachine guns, flooded into the warehouse like a tidal wave, instantly pushing the machete-wielding thugs to the side. These men radiated the true scent of gunpowder and blood, their presence so powerful that the previously arrogant thugs were too scared to even breathe. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A burly middle-aged man in a white silk suit, holding a thick cigar, walked in, flanked by his closest confidants, with a swagger that owned the world. A hideous scar ran from the corner of his eye down to his chin. As he chewed his cigar, the scar writhed like a living centipede. This was the man Julian had described, the underworld emperor who could make New York tremble. Nico the Scar Moretti. Seeing Nico, Julian immediately put on an obsequious grin, rushing to greet him like a dog seeing its master. He practically groveled, ignoring the mud as he bowed low, offering his gun with both hands. "Nico, you're finally here! It's this bitch!" Julian pointed at me, his voice trembling with excitement. "If you take care of her for me today, I promise. All my overseas assets frozen, but still accessible, they're all yours. I'll even be your dog, I'll launder your money." Nico didn't even give Julian a second glance. He impatiently blew out a thick cloud of cigar smoke and casually dug at his ear with the hand holding the cigar. "So noisy. Take the money, do the job. Did you bring the person? I want to see which clueless little princess dared to touch someone I'm protecting." Nico's gaze casually drifted over Julian's shoulder and fell on me, tied up in the center of the room. The moment his eyes met my cold, abyssal gaze, time seemed to freeze. Nico's arrogant expression instantly solidified on his face, as if he had been turned to stone by Medusa. The priceless Cohiba cigar in his mouth fell from his teeth, landing with a soft plop in the muddy water, its embers instantly extinguished. The hideous scar on his face twitched violently as his facial muscles spasmed uncontrollably, looking like it was about to fall off. His ruddy complexion faded to a deathly white in half a second, and cold sweat poured from his forehead like a waterfall, instantly soaking his expensive white suit. "Nico? Nico, what's wrong? Give the order. Waste this bitch." Julian, oblivious to the change in atmosphere, urged him on. "Waste your mother." Nico let out a blood-curdling scream that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. He didn't pick up his cigar, nor did he pay any attention to the hundreds of armed men behind him who were now exchanging bewildered glances. Instead, he did something that made everyone present, including Julian, drop their jaws in shock. His legs gave out, and with a loud thud, he fell to his knees on the muddy, rock-strewn ground. It was the most standard, most subservient two-knee grovel. His knees hit the rocks with such force that it made a dull cracking sound. Why, young. Nico's tongue seemed to be tied in a knot. The mouth that could curse opponents into submission at a negotiation table could now only produce a wheezing, gasping sound. He knelt on the ground and, like a dog, crawled 3 whole meters through the mud and water until he reached my feet. Then, he slammed his arrogant head hard, without hesitation, onto a piece of rusty steel plate. Bang! The impact was so forceful that blood instantly stained the murky water. "Young miss, old Nico is blind. I deserve to die 1,000 deaths. I didn't know it was you, young miss." Nico howled hysterically, repeatedly smashing his head on the ground while slapping himself furiously. The crisp sounds of the slaps echoed in the vast warehouse, each one delivered with full force, drawing blood from the corner of his mouth. "If I had known this dog was trying to kidnap you, you could have given me 10,000 more guts, and I would never have taken this job. Please. Young miss, spare my life. Please have mercy." Dead silence. Apart from the sound of the pouring rain, Warehouse Hassan 3 was deathly quiet. The hundreds of fierce gangsters Nico had brought, seeing their boss groveling like a dog to a bound woman, were all terrified, their faces ashen. They didn't know who I was, but their underworld instincts told them one thing. They had messed with a titan that not even the devil himself would dare to provoke. Clatter. In unison, 100 submachine guns were dropped to the ground. 100 burly men, like a row of dominoes, followed their boss and fell to their knees in the pouring rain, not daring to lift their heads. Julian was completely dumbfounded. He was still frozen in the position of pointing at me, his eyes wide as saucers, his jaw hanging open, a meaningless gurgling sound coming from his throat. His brain could no longer process the absurd scene before him. This was Nico, the Nico whose mere stomp could cause an earthquake in the New York underworld. This was the ultimate trump card he thought he could use to crush me. How? How could he be kneeling before the woman who used to wash his clothes and cook his meals? I remained standing, ignoring the frantically kowtowing Nico. I simply looked down at the mud at my feet. "Untie me," I said, my voice flat. Nico, as if granted a pardon, scrambled forward. He didn't even dare use a knife, instead using his own calloused fingers to painstakingly pick at the coarse rope binding my wrists. He worked so frantically that his fingernails broke, blood mixing with the mud on my coat. Once free, I rubbed the red marks on my wrists. The low growl of engines tore through the rain behind me. It was Arthur, with the Sterling's true elite force, the cleaners in black suits and white gloves who rarely showed their weapons but could easily decide the fate of any gang. They had silently surrounded the entire warehouse. Arthur held a massive black umbrella and walked quickly to my side, shielding me from the rain. He handed me a clean hot towel. I leisurely wiped the mud from my hands and then tossed the towel onto Nico's face. "Old Nico," I said, looking down at him. "Your reach is getting a bit long. You even dare to take a job against me, Serafina Sterling. It seems the sky over this city is due for a change." Nico trembled violently and collapsed onto the ground. He knew that sentence meant his half-a-century-long reign in New York would be utterly wiped out after tonight. But he didn't dare have a single complaint. He could only keep kowtowing desperately. "Thank you, young miss, for sparing my life. Thank you, young miss." I couldn't be bothered to look at him again. I turned and walked, step by step, toward the petrified Julian Croft. My heels clicked on the wet ground. To Julian, the sound was like the Grim Reaper's countdown. I stopped in front of him. Julian began to shake uncontrollably, as if having a seizure. He finally realized what a fatal, irreversible mistake he had made. He had always believed Ilara was just a puppet for Sterling, a kept woman. He had never imagined that this woman was the true master of this land, someone even the king of the underworld had to worship. "What did you say earlier?" I leaned in close to his pale face, my voice soft but carrying a deadly pressure. "The rules of the underworld are something people like me can't imagine?" Julian's knees finally gave way under the mountain of fear. He crashed to the ground. The Browning pistol in his hand fell into the mud, and he had no courage to pick it up. Serafina." Julian's voice was a ragged mess. He tried to grab the hem of my coat, a smile on his face that was uglier than a sob, full of pleading and begging. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. For the sake of our 3 years of marriage, please, spare me. I'll never do it again. It was Cassandra, that bitch, who tricked me. I was blinded. Forgive me. I'll be your dog, your slave." Slap. I backhanded him with all my strength. The force of the blow sent him tumbling across the ground, spitting out 2 bloody molars. "Don't you dare say my name with that filthy mouth." I pulled out the tattered pieces of the $40 million check from my pocket, the one stained with the blood he had made me shed. "Julian Croft, do you think you can just kneel and wag your tail, and this will all be over?" I walked over to him and, with the heel of my shoe, stomped hard on the hand he was using to try and push himself up. "Arr!" Julian let out a piercing scream. I ground my heel, watching his face twist in agony, my eyes devoid of pity. "I gave you a chance, Julian, when you broke my ribs, when you threw that check at me. I played along with your pathetic kidnapping plot just so you could watch your last hope crumble before your very eyes." I crouched down, grabbing his hair and forcing his head up to look at me. "The ceiling of your world, the man you thought could kill me," I sneered, gesturing toward Nico, who was still frozen in terror, "is nothing more than a pawn on a board he doesn't even understand." I let go of his hair, letting him fall back into the mud like a pile of sludge. "Arthur." I stood up and took another clean handkerchief, wiping my fingers. "Let the police know an anonymous tip reports suspicious activity here. Then we leave. A cornered rat will always destroy itself trying to escape." "Yes, young miss," Arthur bowed. I turned and, stepping over the mud in despair, walked toward the Rolls-Royce. I didn't look back. As our convoy pulled away, sirens began to wail in the distance. Consumed by sheer terror, Julian scrambled to his feet. He jumped into the nearest car, a beat-up sedan belonging to one of the thugs, and sped out of the warehouse, desperate to flee. He drove recklessly through the storm, his mind shattered. The ensuing police chase was short and brutal. On a rain-slicked highway, Julian lost control of the car, slamming it into a concrete bridge abutment at over 100 miles per hour. The sound of crunching metal echoed briefly before being swallowed by the storm. He wasn't found until dawn, barely clinging to life. The hospital room had no natural light, none of the warmth that signifies life. Blindingly white, mercilessly cold surgical lights hung from the morgue-like ceiling, illuminating every corner, every crevice of the sealed space. The overwhelming scent of disinfectant, mixed with an indescribable odor of decay emanating from the near-dead, brutally pierced Julian Croft's senses, reaching deep into his muddled brain, which felt as if it had been repeatedly run over by a steamroller. Accompanied by the monotonous, cold, and regular beeping of the state-of-the-art life support monitor, Julian Croft's bloodshot eyes snapped open in what felt like an endless dark abyss. There were no crystal chandeliers from his luxurious Denver mansion, no plush bed that felt like sinking into clouds, and no subservient maids ready to serve him at a moment's notice. He instinctively wanted to raise his hand to shield his eyes from the harsh light, to shout for his butler. However, the microsecond his brain sent the command to his limbs, a cataclysmic, terrifying pain, beyond all human comprehension, erupted from every cell, every nerve ending in his body, like 10,000 volcanoes erupting at once. It was a pain no fragile human body could endure. It felt as if thousands of rusty, barbed saws were slowly being dragged through every joint in his body. The slightest muscle twitch would trigger a series of convulsions that made him want to bite off his own tongue. Arg! Julian's mouth gaped open in terror, wanting to let out a blood-curdling scream. But to his horror, he found he could feel no vibration in his vocal cords. A thick, cold, transparent medical silicone tube had been brutally inserted deep into his trachea. The tube had stripped him of his ability to speak, leaving him to make only a wheezing, raspy sound, like a dying beast with its throat slit. The rapid breathing instantly tugged at his fractured ribs, the very place where he had so nonchalantly ordered his bodyguards to break 8 of Alara's. Now, that pain was returned to him 100-fold. The tearing sensation made his vision go black. When the darkness slowly receded and his vision refocused, he was drenched in sweat. He frantically moved the only part of his body he could still control, his eyes, and desperately looked down. The sight before him made his heart stop, his soul dragged into a freezing, eternal abyss. His limbs, the hands he had once used with pride to command his empire, to sign checks, to humiliate others, and the legs he had used to stride with arrogance, were now encased in thick, heavy casts of white polymer bandages that reeked of plaster. Countless cold titanium metal rods and thick, sharp steel pins had been brutally driven through his numb flesh, savagely pinning his shattered bones. His arms and legs were suspended high in the air in a grotesque, humiliatingly twisted posture. He looked like a cruelly dismembered puppet, forcibly pieced back together and pinned to an intensive care bed. So, you're finally awake. Your cockroach-like resilience has exceeded my medical expectations. A cold, detached voice, devoid of any human emotion, sounded from the right side of the bed. Julian struggled to turn his stiff eyeballs. A head physician in a pristine white coat, with gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, stood by the bed, holding a thick medical file. The doctor's eyes held no pity, only the kind of utter disdain one would have when observing a disgusting parasite under a microscope. Don't bother struggling. Comminuted fractures in 37 places throughout your body. The doctor announced the verdict in a cruelly flat tone, pushing his glasses up. Your kneecaps have been repeatedly and precisely shattered into bone dust that cannot be reconstructed. You will never stand again. The tendons in your right hand have been completely severed, and the 5 fingers have suffered irreversible crush injuries. You won't even have the strength to hold a plastic fork. Of course, with modern medicine, these external injuries would only make you severely disabled. What's truly fatal is this. The doctor's pen pointed vaguely at the center of Julian's back. Your 4th and 5th lumbar vertebrae have suffered catastrophic impact. The spinal cord is completely severed. In layman's terms, from the neck down, you are a complete and utter corpse. We managed to save your life, but for the rest of it, apart from your eyes that can still move and your brain that can still feel endless pain, you won't be able to control a single strand of hair. You will lie on this bed forever like a pile of rotting meat, fed through a nasogastric tube, your waste collected by a catheter. You won't even be able to swat a fly from your nose. Boom. The doctor's words were like a nuclear bomb detonating in Julian's mind, completely shattering his last sliver of hope. He tried frantically to shake his head, to fight back. Impossible. He was the most dazzling star in Denver's business world. He controlled a billion-dollar empire. He was only in his 30s. How could he become a helpless invalid? I have money. Get me treatment. Julian managed to squeeze out a few desperate, broken syllables, using the last of his oxygen. He wouldn't accept it. If he went to the best labs abroad, spent $1 billion, he could be cured. The doctor sneered and slammed the medical file shut. The sharp crack sounded like a death knell in the room. Mr. Croft, you don't seem to understand the nature of the entity you have offended. An old gentleman by the name of Arthur brought you here. On behalf of his master, he paid in full for 50 years in this top-tier private hospital's special care ICU. He also established an overseas medical trust fund large enough to buy out Croft Industries 10 times over. The old gentleman gave a strict order. Use the world's most expensive drugs, the most advanced life support systems, to keep you alive at all costs. If an organ fails, we are to buy a new one. In short, no matter how much you suffer, you are absolutely not allowed to die. The doctor paused, his gaze becoming incredibly deep. The anonymous trust funding your care has issued strict directives. We are legally bound to employ maximum life-saving interventions. Do not resuscitate, DNR. Orders have been explicitly denied by your appointed legal proxy. You will be kept alive, Mr. Croft, no matter the discomfort. Seraphina Sterling. Those 3 words were like nails forged in hellfire, driven deep into Julian's shattered soul. The woman he had trampled on, thrown out into the rain like a stray dog, the woman whose 8 broken ribs he had bought for $40 million, she had never intended to kill him. Death was too easy for him. She had used her unimaginable resources to strip him of all dignity and mobility, turning him into a living corpse that could only breathe with the help of a machine. Kill me. Julian's eyes bulged, a desperate, guttural sound escaping his throat. I'm sorry, we don't offer euthanasia. And the people outside would never agree to let you go so easily. The doctor pressed a button on the wall. With a heavy mechanical groan, the bulletproof, soundproof door opened. 5 stern-faced police officers in high-ranking uniforms strode into the room, surrounding Julian. Julian Croft, we are a joint task force from the Denver Police Department and federal agencies. We are formally placing you under arrest. The lead officer held up an arrest warrant with a bright red seal. Based on irrefutable evidence and global financial tracking, you are being charged with large-scale forgery of commercial documents, massive tax evasion, and embezzlement of public assets, with the total amount exceeding $6 billion. Furthermore, high-definition video evidence transferred from the NYPD shows you have repeatedly hired individuals with known syndicate ties for assault, illegal detention, and even attempted armed kidnapping of Sterling Industries chairwoman, Miss Seraphina Sterling. The old officer's gaze was as sharp as a cleaver, flaying the last of Julian's pathetic pride. Given your current state of high-level paralysis, you will not be detained in a holding cell. However, you will be under 2 4-hour maximum-level monitored house arrest. In 3 months, a trial will be held in this very room. Let me be clear. From the moment you attempted to flee from that derelict shipyard in New Jersey, every domestic account, hidden overseas trust, property, luxury car, and even your Swiss bank-bearer bonds were legally seized by the Sterling legal team and frozen by the courts over 2 weeks ago. Croft Industries has officially declared bankruptcy and has been fully acquired by Sterling Industries. You are now poorer than a beggar and burdened with a debt you could never repay in several lifetimes. Before Julian could even gasp for breath from this devastating blow, another wheelchair was pushed into the room. A white-haired old woman sat slumped in it, her mouth agape, drooling uncontrollably. It was Julian's mother, the snobbish matriarch who had once made Alara's life hell. The moment she learned of the Croft family's bankruptcy and her son's arrest, she had suffered a severe stroke. Although she was saved, she was left with severe paralysis. She, too, was under police custody for aiding in the transfer of illicit funds. Mother and son stared at each other across the room with twisted, desperate eyes, unable to speak a single coherent word. $6 billion in tax evasion, attempted armed kidnapping, assets liquidated, the entire family paralyzed. This complete and utter annihilation from the physical to the social with no hope of recovery sent Julian's heart monitor into a screaming red alert. Before he slipped into a long, dark coma, one image flashed clearly in his mind. The stormy night, 3 years ago, the woman named Alara, kneeling until she was bruised and bloody in front of the Sterling estate to save his crumbling company. If he hadn't been so arrogant and ignorant, if he had shown even a shred of sincerity and respect as a husband, he would now be the most envied man in the entire global business empire. But fate had come full circle. For the next half-century, he would be imprisoned in this 3-foot-wide bed, his heart eternally gnawed at by the venomous snakes of regret. Meanwhile, at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, under the dim light of the visitation room, Cassandra Reed sat like a soulless ghost, held down by two prison guards. She wore a rough, striped prison uniform, her once waist-length hair crudely shorn into a jagged buzz cut. The bulletproof glass of the visitation booth cruelly reflected the large, twisted, and uneven reddish-brown scars on the right side of her face, the permanent keloid scars left after the hot pot burns became infected and ulcerated. On the other side of the glass, a top lawyer from Sterling Industries emotionlessly read from a list of charges. Cassandra Reed, you are charged with long-term extortion, embezzlement of massive company assets, and collusion with Julian Croft in the assault of Miss Seraphina Sterling. Are you still hoping your connections from the Denver party scene, that Mr. Davison will come to bail you out? A mad light flared in Cassandra's dead eyes. She slammed her good left hand against the glass. Yes, Mr. Davison, Mr. Lee, they promised me. As long as I kept them happy, they would do anything to protect me. Go get them. I have dirt on them. The lawyer gave a mocking sneer and held up a document with several red thumbprints to the glass. Wake up. In the face of Sterling Industries' vast, overwhelming power, the men you call your connections are less than ants. To save their own pathetic businesses from being crushed by the Sterling war machine, all your so-called darlings from your phone contacts eagerly turned into witnesses against you the day after your arrest. Mr. Davison not only provided a detailed account of your extortion through seduction and drugs, but also voluntarily submitted all the recordings of you instructing Julian Croft on how to transfer assets. You've been thrown into the sewer like a virus-ridden rag. Based on the evidence, you are facing a sentence of over 15 years. And with 30 of Sterling's top lawyers assigned to your case, you will not get a single second of parole. No, impossible. Cassandra's facial muscles twitched violently, the large burn scar seeping blood, making her look like a ghoul. She slammed her bald head against the glass. I want to see Seraphina Sterling. Let me see her. I'll beg at her feet. I'll be her dog. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to be beaten to death in prison with this ruined face. The lawyer stood up coldly. See our chairwoman? You are nothing but a speck of dust she once carelessly crushed under her heel. Even hearing your name once more would dirty her ears. Get ready to spend the rest of your life making license plates. Let's hope you're as resilient as a cockroach and live to see your release date. The lawyer turned and left without a backward glance, leaving Cassandra to let out a desperate, piercing scream within the cold, high walls. Her once prized skills of seduction were nothing but laughable plastic toys in the face of absolute power and resources, and now they had brought her to ruin. Time flew under the cleansing force of absolute power. Half a month later, in the heart of Denver's most prosperous CBD, the skyscraper that once bore the Croft Industries logo had been scrubbed clean and replaced with a gleaming gold sign. Sterling Industries, Western U.S. Headquarters. At 7 a.m., a cold wind howled. An old man with white hair and a severely hunched back, wearing a washed-out old suit, shivered in the plaza. He was the Croft family's old housekeeper. After the family's fall from grace, the childless, 70-year-old man had lost his livelihood. Desperate, he had seen a notice for a warehouse stock clerk position at the building's side entrance and had been waiting since before dawn. Hey, old man, what are you doing? A young security guard in a brand-new uniform came out of his booth, waving his hand dismissively. Go away. If you're begging, go to the underpass. This is the Sterling headquarters. Don't be an eyesore here. The old housekeeper was shoved roughly and nearly fell. He tremblingly took out his handwritten resume and pleaded in a low voice. Young man, I'm not begging. I'm here to apply for the warehouse position. I'm a hard worker. I just need 2 meals a day. Are you senile? Even our cleaning staff has to be under 45. If your old bones give out here, who's responsible? Get lost, the guard cursed. The old housekeeper bit his dry lip in despair, whispering almost to himself, Young man, please, just let me try. I know your new big boss. I know Alara. I used to serve her. The guard froze for a second, then burst out into loud, unrestrained laughter. Ha ha ha, you old fool. You're so desperate for a job you've gone crazy. You know our chairwoman? If you know the chairwoman, then I'm the President of the United States. Scram. Just as the guard was pulling out his rubber baton to forcibly remove him, a piercing screech of brakes cut through the air. A convoy of 6 black armored Maybachs with consecutive New York plates, completely ignoring the no parking signs, drove aggressively onto the granite plaza and formed a semicircle, blocking the main entrance. Dozens of top-tier bodyguards in black suits and sunglasses instantly got out and opened the doors in perfect unison. Then, The newly appointed high-level executives of Sterling's Denver branch rushed out of the building as if their tails were on fire, sweating profusely. The branch president ran up to the stunned young security guard, his face purple with rage. "You're fired! Pack your things and get off this property before I have you arrested for trespassing," he roared, stripping the guard of his badge right then and there. "You blind fool! How dare you obstruct the chairwoman's esteemed guest?" Under the shocked gazes of everyone present, Arthur, the chief steward who was always by Serafina Sterling's side, dressed in an impeccable tailcoat, stepped out of the lead Maybach. He walked quickly to the shabbily dressed old housekeeper, smiled warmly, and took the old man's trembling hands in both of his. "My dear old friend, you have been wronged." Arthur's voice was gentle and full of respect. "The young miss has been thinking of you in New York. The wind in Denver is too cold. She sent me to fly here overnight to bring you home. A private estate in the Hamptons has already been prepared for you. From this day forward, a multi-million-dollar trust has been established in your name, with a 24-hour private medical team. For the rest of your life, no one will ever dare to let you suffer again." The old housekeeper's cloudy eyes instantly filled with tears of disbelief. His lips trembled, unable to form a complete sentence. And the guard who had been knocked to the ground had long since soiled himself in terror, collapsing into a heap. He knew his career in the entire western United States was completely over. 1,000 miles away, in Midtown Manhattan, atop the Sterling Twin Towers, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window in a pure white, custom-tailored women's suit. I watched the monitor as Arthur safely escorted the old housekeeper into the car, a gentle warmth appearing in my eyes. In this world, fair-weather friends are a dime a dozen, but true allies are rare. In those 3 years with the Croft family, when I was as lowly as dirt, when my ribs were broken and I was thrown into the rain, he was the only one who didn't kick me while I was down, but instead hid behind a door and cried for me. That kindness, I, Serafina Sterling, will never forget. I turned and gave an order to my team of assistants behind me. Take all the liquid assets generated from the acquisition and dismantling of Croft Industries during this period. Establish a global, specialized, charitable foundation. Its name will be Project Chrysalis. Form a pro bono legal team composed of the world's top lawyers. Create top-level, secret shelters. I will use this dirty money squeezed from Julian Croft to unconditionally save women who are suffering from domestic violence and facing economic blockades with nowhere to turn. I want all abusers to tremble at the name Project Chrysalis. I will be their strongest armor and their firmest support. As night fell, the entire city of New York transformed into a sea of glittering stars. The landmark hotel was completely booked out by Sterling Industries. 3 main thoroughfares were under traffic control. Hundreds of heavily armed bodyguards in black stood guard. Tonight, the absolute apex predators of the business world were gathered here. The resources they controlled could cripple small nations, but at this moment, they all sat quietly and nervously in the magnificent banquet hall, their gazes fixed with reverence on the main stage. Because tonight was the coronation of the new head of the Sterling family, the one who had crushed the rising star of Denver into dust with the force of a thunderbolt. At 0 p.m. sharp, the hundreds of crystal chandeliers in the hall were extinguished. A single, dazzlingly cold white spotlight hit the end of the red carpet. I walked into the beam of light with a steady, composed gait that carried an absolute oppressive weight. I wasn't wearing an elaborate evening gown, but a custom-made, midnight black velvet suit, handcrafted by a legendary Parisian tailor. On my left lapel was a sterling black gold rose brooch, carved from a single, rare black diamond, emitting a fatal luster. My long hair was impeccably styled, revealing a sharp jawline. The Alara who once played the docile housewife had died completely on that stormy night. The one standing before them now was the true ruler who held the power of life and death, Serafina Sterling. I walked along the petal-strewn red carpet toward the mahogany lectern. Each step of my high heels on the carpet seemed to land on the hearts of the audience. Just as I was about to speak, an old and arrogant shipping magnate, Constantine the Titan Marcos, who was sitting in the front row, suddenly thumped his cane heavily on the floor. He snorted condescendingly, "Sterling girl, your methods are aggressive. You annihilated the entire Croft family over a man. There are unwritten rules. We don't burn down the whole forest to catch one rabbit. It's bad for business. Aren't you afraid of repercussions?" The hall fell into a dead silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see how the new queen would react. I stopped and looked down at Constantine Marcos, a chilling arc forming on my lips. I didn't even get angry. I simply snapped my fingers. An assistant immediately came forward and handed a tablet to the old magnate. The screen showed that in the last 10 minutes, Sterling Industries' financial warfare team on Wall Street had used terrifying leverage to precisely short the stock of Marcos's core shipping company. The stock price had already plummeted by 30%. Constantine Marcos's face instantly turned from ruddy to ashen. The hand holding his cane trembled violently. His lips quivered, unable to utter another word. Bad for business? I placed one hand on the microphone, my deep black eyes sweeping across the entire hall with a world-conquering coldness. That is a rule from your obsolete system, a system stained with the blood of the weak. I am not here today to explain myself to you. I am here to rewrite the rules. My voice was like a drawn sword. You are all accustomed to trampling on dignity with money. You think breaking 8 ribs and tossing out $40 million is a natural, charitable act. If the gears of capitalism are stained with the blood of the innocent and the ruins of domestic violence, then Sterling Industries will not hesitate to use all its power to personally smash those filthy gears to pieces. I once hid my name and fell into a dark abyss. I know that reasoning with demons is useless. The only way to deal with a demon is to show it what true hell looks like. Therefore, I, Serafina Sterling, hereby establish a new rule for the entire global business community. From this day forward, Sterling's vast investment landscape and resource channels will be permanently closed to any individual or enterprise that betrays trust, tramples on the sanctity of marriage, or is involved in domestic abuse. I pressed both hands on the lectern, like a lioness surveying her territory. In my world, you don't need to have connections or resources, but you must have a moral compass. I don't care who is backing you. I will make you understand, with absolute clarity, what a true crushing defeat from a higher dimension feels like. After a dead silence, a thunderous, deafening applause erupted like a tsunami. All the business tycoons stood up, giving their most fervent applause to the Sterling leader who had redefined the bottom line of business. Countless camera flashes enveloped me in the most dazzling light. I stood at the pinnacle, gently touching the spot on my ribs where the bones had once broken. There was no longer any pain there. In its place had grown an armor stronger than titanium. This black gold rose, reborn from the flames of hell, was now blooming wantonly at the peak of power. From this day forward, no one would dare to break it, and no one could ever stop it.